Roland stepped closer to the edge, looked down into darkness, felt his stomach drop. Somewhere down there was his armor, probably, if it hadn't been sold or destroyed or claimed by something that lived in those caves. He'd walked all this way on that assumption. Penny came up beside him, assessed the drop with slight detachment. Well, this is going to be awful. Yep, Roland agreed. Lymphocytus joined them at the edge, staring down with that analytical expression you got when solving problems he didn't actually want solved. There has to be a way down that doesn't kill us. Probably, Penny said. Question is whether it's a way that lets us get back up again. Nobody had an answer for that. The vulture circled overhead, waiting. The ravine lay still below them. No fires visible, no shouts carrying up, no obvious movement betraying life. Just stone and shadow. The vulture followed lazily as they moved along the edge. Roland kicked a loose stone without thinking, watched it tumble down, bouncing off rock face, gathering speed. A group of crows exploded from a dead tree at the bottom, their caws sharp and accusatory before fading fast. What remained was wind against stone, occasional water dripping somewhere, and a distant echo from deep in the ravine that was impossible to place. Could be water, could be something else. Lymphocytus counted cave openings, trying to memorize positions. Near the bottom on the eastern wall, 2 low openings almost disappeared in shadow behind debris and bushes. Ground in front of them was trampled, but not recently. Old traffic, abandoned maybe. Further west, higher up, a broader opening sat like a carved mouth in the mountainside. A natural ledge in front of it. He could make out traces of fire there, old ash, no flames now. Higher still, maybe halfway up the northern wall, several smaller black holes. Hard to count exactly, at least 3. Getting up there would require climbing or taking a long route along the ravine's slope. At the western end, where ground started rising again, more openings, irregular, partially hidden by rockfall. They looked older, less traveled. So, which way's easiest? Roland was already impatient, wanting to move. Easiest doesn't mean best, Lymphocytus countered, still studying the layout. We came for our stuff, Penny said. And they're kidnapping people, probably. But I can't tell where they actually are. Could be any of those caves. The one with the fire, Roland suggested, pointing. That's where they'd keep things. Or it's a decoy. Lymphocytus adjusted his pack straps. They're not stupid. They argued quietly about which cave to investigate. The nearest one required least climbing, which mattered since they had no proper gear. Ideally, they'd go around to reach the ravine bottom, but time was the only advantage they had. Dawn was coming fast. Nearest cave, Roland decided. We can see the others from there, adjust if needed. Nobody had better ideas. They moved. They followed the ravine's edge until the slope eased into a steep, gravelly descent instead of sheer drop. Ground here was loose, dirt mixed with small stones and roots, and every step had to be placed carefully or they'd trigger a slide that would announce them to everything below. They went down sideways, sometimes gripping roots or jutting stone, sometimes sliding several feet before catching hold again. Below them, the ravine floor stayed in shadow, still dark despite approaching dawn. The cave opening they were aiming for sat low, partially hidden behind dead bushes and a cracked stone pillar. The opening itself was natural, uneven, low, wide enough for 2 people side by side if they crouched. Air seeping out was warm and stale. Something else in the smell, too, hard to identify. Not smoke. Not food, something more alive. They reached solid ground directly in front of the opening. No guards visible, no voices audible. But the ground just inside the opening was trampled hard. Not chaotic, deliberate, like many feet had gone in and out repeatedly over time. They stopped just at the entrance. Penny's eyes adjusted slowly to darkness. The cave widened slightly beyond the mouth, a short, rough antechamber before the mountain closed in again. Walls were damp and uneven. Ceiling sloped down so you instinctively ducked entering. Floor was packed earth, trampled almost stone hard. The smell was stronger inside. Damp old fur, sweat, something faintly metallic like dried blood. Not fresh, but frequent enough it hadn't faded completely. She heard sounds, not voices. Movement. Regular, deeper in. Scraping of claws or leather against stone. A low, snuffling breath. Something shifting weight from one leg to another. Sometimes a short clicking sound like wood or bone tapping lightly on stone. Light from dawn reached maybe 2 meters in. Beyond that, solid darkness. But in that darkness was a narrow corridor curving away from them. The sounds came from there. Whatever was in there was awake. Lymphocytus leaned close to Penny and lowered his voice. Same creatures. Has to be. Listen to how they move, and the smell. I know, Penny murmured, already scanning the darkness and mapping angles, exits, distances. But I want to see the layout before we commit to anything. Roland caught her arm before she could move. Bad idea. Penny shifted her weight, already half turning away. I'll just get a better view. Penny, Roland warned. She ignored him and glanced down at the predator beside her. You coming? The predator's ears were forward, alert but not alarmed. It moved toward the cave entrance without hesitation. Penny took that as yes and followed before the others could stop her, staying low, controlling her breathing, letting the predator lead because its eyes worked better than hers in darkness. Behind her, Roland and Lymphocytus exchanged looks, frustrated, worried, but not surprised. They just had to be ready when it went wrong. Penny waited until the others went completely still behind her. She exhaled slowly, dropped her shoulders, let her body become part of the cave's darkness. The predator looked up at her, blinked once, slow, deliberate, then glided forward soundlessly, tail low, movements fluid and controlled. They moved in. Steps were barely shifts of weight. Stones on the floor lay steady, worn smooth by the same feet over generations. Walls closed in, then opened again, and after several meters, the raw cave transitioned into something more deliberate. Walls roughly hewn, ceiling bearing tool marks. Sounds got clearer. Muted voices, rough, grating sounds more like growling than speech. A sharp, barking laugh. Wood being drawn taut, then released. Penny crawled to the edge of a larger space and froze. The predator went rigid beside her. Ahead, some kind of guard room. 4 large, broad-shouldered figures spread throughout the space. Fur-covered bodies, hunched posture, heads resembling wolves or hyenas, jaws full of yellow teeth bared when they spoke low to each other. 2 stood further back near the wall, bows in hand with arrows nocked. The other 2 stayed closer to the passage. Heavy weapons leaned against shoulders, alert but relaxed. On the floor, worn hides, bone fragments, carelessly thrown sacks, a table, some barrels. Metal gleamed faintly at their belts when they moved. One kept sniffing the air, head tilted like it was listening with its whole body. The predator froze completely, but didn't move. Invisible here, as much shadow as stone. In a leather pouch in her tunic's inner pocket, Penny had 2 rations of raw meat from yesterday's hunt. She dug carefully, fighting the urge to shout in relief when her fingers found a small vial with orange liquid. She loosened the cork soundlessly. The scent was faint, almost non-existent, but the predator wrinkled its nose briefly before settling again. She worked methodically, dripping liquid slowly over the meat fibers, letting it soak in. The meat looked the same as before, nothing suspicious. Then she crawled forward again, just a few steps, exactly enough. She placed the meat pieces just inside the room, where light fell weakly from inner passages. A spot where someone pacing restlessly would easily notice them. A spot where the scent would spread. Penny backed up, 1 foot at a time, breathing controlled. The predator followed like a shadow. No sounds, no hesitation. Behind them, the gnolls kept muttering. Nobody sensed something new had been added to their room. When Penny reached the others, her face was calm, but her eyes were sharp. Something had been set in motion. She told them what she'd seen and done. Got quiet back pats, encouraging words whispered. Roland mentioned that if this didn't work, another option was having someone act as bait at the cave entrance while the others dropped large stones from above when they came out. But that was plan B. For now, they waited. While waiting, they scanned the ravine for anything new. Time moved slowly here. Air in the ravine was cold now, just before dawn, fog lying in low pockets between boulders. As their eyes adjusted, they saw more. Small movements, shadows that didn't quite behave like wind. Something moved along the ravine bottom far away, maybe just birds hopping between bone piles, maybe something larger staying behind cover. Then they heard it. A low, rough snuffling from inside the cave. One of those guttural voices they'd already identified started sounding wrong. Not pain, not anger, more like confusion. A heavy dragging sound followed, like something trying to stand but not quite getting its body coordinated. Then a hard thud against stone. Another. A barking sound from a different voice, short and irritated. Someone answered, but the response was choppy, broken, like words were getting stuck halfway out. Something in there had changed. Steps were no longer rhythmic and confident. Something being dragged across floor. A wet, slapping sound against stone, completely wrong for a creature that had been moving upright moments ago. Lymphocytus leaned forward slowly, whispered barely audibly, "They don't understand what's happening." A new sound, a dull fall, followed by aggressive muttering from multiple directions. No rush, no alarm yet. Just confusion spreading and irritation looking for a target. They looked at each other, nodded, moved in fast with weapons raised, taking advantage of the confusion. Roland went first, low but quick, sword ready. Penny followed tight behind, crossbow up, gaze already into the room. Lymphocytus glided in last, sling already spinning. They stopped short just before fully entering. The smell hit them immediately. Warm, animal, and now also sweet chemical in a way that didn't belong here. The sight was wrong. One creature lay on the floor near where the meat had been placed, right at the entrance. Its body had collapsed like it had lost internal structure. Limbs were still there, but they weren't bearing weight properly anymore. It tried to rise, but every movement made the body flow outward slightly, like thick meat in too hot grease. It made a frustrated, gurgling bark. Another gnoll stood near the opening, still upright but unnaturally, holding the poisoned meat. Knees and hips bending wrong, posture unsteady, like the body was giving way from inside. It seemed to realize something was wrong, but not what. The other two stood further into the room, still combat ready. One had bow in hand, had just turned toward its companions when they rushed in. The other stood closer to the room's interior, crude sword in hand, ready to move. Roland surged forward, sword already coming up over his head. "We take the ugly one!" Roland shouted. "They're all ugly!" Lymphocytus shouted back, scrambling after him. "And what the hell did you do, Penny?" Penny didn't even look at him. "Forget it! Get him before he shoots!" Penny yelled. Roland swung down hard at the knoll with the bow but slipped on the knoll, writhing on the ground, and fell forward helplessly. Lymphocytus and Penny attacked simultaneously. Penny with the crossbow, Lymphocytus with sling. Penny's bolt grazed the knoll's cheek, opening a shallow wound. Lymphocytus's stone caught it right between the eyes. It screamed and lost balance backward, had to grip the wall to keep from falling. The predator moved before anyone fully registered it happening. While Roland slipped and Lymphocytus's stone crushed the archer's forehead, the predator flowed low across floor, almost liquid over stone and spill. A short, dry, hissing sound, not loud but loaded. The predator launched up at the side where arm met torso on the knoll with the crude sword. Claws went deep. The creature screamed, surprise more than pain, and the predator stuck like adhesive to its side. Meanwhile, Eldrin had moved forward. He'd stepped casually over the threshold like he'd always been meant to stand there. When the second half-poisoned creature tried to shout, the sound came out as a rattling bark. Eldrin was behind it, one hand on its neck, the other against its ribcage. He whispered something to it. The creature's movement stopped. It seemed to hesitate, like its body no longer quite remembered what order things should happen in. One knoll lay smeared and helpless on the floor. One was falling apart from inside. One stood with crushed skull and blood in its eyes, still up but barely. The last was occupied trying to remove a predator that had every advantage of low center of gravity and pure determination. Voices carried from deeper in the cave. Not clear words, but reactions, maybe to the commotion here. The knoll with the predator attached twisted and writhed, trying to throw it off. The predator pressed harder, violent and exact. Weight shifted so the knoll's shoulder was forced down into the ground while back legs locked. Claws went through leather and fur. The knoll whimpered. The predator lowered its head and blew warm breath directly at the throat, releasing a low, vibrating sound. It tried to wrestle the predator off, but had nothing to push against. Too heavy, too painful. Penny ran to where the predator was, reloaded her shot, and executed the knoll coldly with calculated aim. The archer fired wildly into the room, but it could barely see through all the blood, missed Lymphocytus's shoulder by a hand's width, bolt ricocheting off the cave wall. Lymphocytus ducked and loaded his sling with another stone, caught the archer in the temple. Its gaze disappeared for several seconds. Roland exploited the moment, kicked its legs out. It fell helplessly forward into the table head first with a wet smack. Then didn't move. The room got noticeably quieter. The knoll at the entrance still tried to get up, but there was nothing to rise with. Its body had given up form. A leg slid away when it pressed, spine bent like soft dough, and it hit the floor with a wet sound. It was conscious, but every attempt to do anything cost more than it could manage. Breathing was frantic, panicked, but subdued. It couldn't flee, could barely lie properly. The predator released its prey and moved away, tail low but steady. It looked briefly at Penny, then back at the room. No new movement, no new scent. The other knoll jerked in Eldrin's grip, first aggressively, then confused. Strength drained from arms mid-movement. Fingers lost grip on weapon, which hit stone with a clang. Knees buckled like legs no longer knew how to bear weight. Eldrin felt the resistance change, how the body became unstable, hard to hold because it was no longer rigid enough. The knoll whined, a low, rasping sound, more fear than pain now. It drew breath to scream, but Penny was already there. She moved without hesitation, drew her dagger across its throat, and held until resistance disappeared. The body jerked, then went heavy in Eldrin's grip, and it sank to the floor. Roland rose to his knees, stepped to the creature at the entrance. It was more mass than body now, jaws still working weakly. He turned his sword and struck with the pommel, hard and methodical. 1, 2, 3 blows. The skull gave way with a dull, wet sound. Movement ceased. Silence fell. No footsteps yet. No shouts. But deeper in the tunnels, there was life. Movement. They felt it in how the air carried sound. Something could be coming. Soon. Behind the room, a narrow passage led deeper into darkness. From there came faint smell of more creatures. Fire. Something alive moving further in. Bad choke point to end up in, Roland muttered, scanning the corridor outside the guard room. Clearly carved from mountain, not natural. Walls straighter here, steps uneven but worn by many feet. The stairs led down and ended at a slanted T-junction where darkness pooled thicker. Sound traveled easily. Even a whisper felt like it wanted to roll deeper into the depths. They searched the room quickly. In one corner stood barrels and sacks. Along the wall near the entrance hung crude weapons, rough wooden bows, arrows with unevenly attached points, shields with cracked edges. Used, not ceremonial. Lymphocytus went to the barrels and sacks, mostly supplies rather than treasure. Dried meat, tough and reeking. Some fresh pieces already going bad. Roots, bones, fat in jars. One barrel held water that tasted of sulfur and earth. Another contained cloudy, fermented drink that smelled sour. Penny crouched beside the predator. "You can eat the 2 that aren't poisoned, not the others." The predator didn't hesitate. It moved low and controlled, sniffed briefly, then went directly to the 2 bodies without that sweet chemical poison stench. It ate quickly, but not sloppily, like a predator that knew time was a resource. Occasionally it paused, ears swiveling toward the corridor, alert. Eldrin stood still near the wall the whole time, said nothing, but his gaze moved between the stairs, the junction, them. When the predator started eating, he nodded almost imperceptibly, like this was exactly how things should be. "So what do we do?" Penny kept her voice low. "Wait here for someone new to show up, or go down?" "If we barricade ourselves in and someone comes," Lymphocytus gestured at the single entrance, "we're trapped." Roland was already moving toward the corridor. "Then we don't wait. We go." They moved down the passage without leaving more than faint shadows behind them. The mountain was drier here, air thicker. Smell changed gradually, less raw storage stench, more warm fur, ash, old fat. The passage wound slightly, deliberately breaking sight lines, and each turn made it harder to judge how large the space beyond the next curve actually was. As they neared the passage's end, low sounds carried. Not speech, movement, breathing, something scraping against stone. A dull, rhythmic sound of multiple bodies occupying the same space. To the right, a large room opened up, low ceiling, smoke-stained, full of life, bodies everywhere. Gnolls, sitting, lying, moving among each other. Some gnawing bones, others pawing through piles of rags and hides. Young ones crawling between adults, pulling at fur, biting, play-fighting. Cramped but organized in its own way. The fire in the center burned low but alive. Nobody seemed to be looking directly at the passage right now, but the noise level was high enough that a misstep would carry. They crept past the opening unnoticed. Further ahead, straight down the passage's end, another space came into view. Quieter there. The firelight stronger but more concentrated. Shadows fell harder. They could make out larger figures, heavier armor, something resembling a raised area around a hearth. Not a room you just passed through casually. Roland pointed. The others nodded. They pressed against the mountain wall near the opening and let several breaths pass. Listened carefully. "It's the ones we fought the other night," Lymphocytus thought, crawling to the opening's edge. He said nothing, moved slowly, almost reverently, like he didn't want to disturb the air itself. His fingers drew signs that didn't quite belong in the world, and from his hands seeped soft white mist, like thin fog with its own will. The mist slid across stone floor, crept along walls, snuck into the room soundlessly. It sought faces, heads, breath. Inside the chamber, movement stopped first imperceptibly. A conversation lost rhythm. Someone halted mid-step. A hand resting on a weapon sank slowly down. One after another, bodies went slack, like the exhaustion they'd carried their whole lives had suddenly gotten permission to win. The heaviest of them, the one who'd borne the room rather than just occupied it, sat down first, like he'd meant to do it deliberately, then tipped sideways and went completely still. His breathing went deep, slow, almost ceremonial. The others fell where they stood or sat. Someone sank toward the hearth, another against the wall. Nobody jerked. Nobody resisted. Penny grabbed Lymphocytus's shoulder, squeezed. Roland gave a thumbs up. Lymphocytus's face went red, but he looked pleased with himself. The group slid in one by one, carefully, almost respectfully. Air in the room was warm from bodies and old fire. The smell was heavy, and the smell that always existed where many creatures lived close together. The room was quite large, floor trampled and stained. Along walls lay piles of hides, broken furniture, barrels and chests probably used more as seating than storage. The hearth in one corner still glowed faintly. Above it, a sooty chimney disappeared up into darkness. Only one real opening led back to the passage they'd come from. No door, no gates. The sleepers lay spread out, some in piles near walls, others around the hearth. The largest of them, the one who'd spoken for the group when they'd met at the camp, when the armor and equipment were stolen, lay nearest the fire, on his back, chest rising slowly. The others slept heavily beside each other, weapons within arm's reach. The predator crept in last and stayed low, ears constantly moving. Eldrin remained near the opening, held up his hand like he was feeling the room's energy. "Should we barricade the entrance?" Roland whispered. "Keep anyone else from coming in?" Penny shook her head. "If there's only one way in and out, we're the ones who get trapped. Let's search first. If our stuff's anywhere, it should be here. But first, we finish them," Roland said quietly, already moving. Penny crouched beside the predator. "Keep watch at the entrance. Any movement, you let me know, okay?" The predator's gaze stayed fixed on the passage. Penny took that as agreement. Lymphocytus moved slowly around the edges, letting his hand trail over stone, wood, hide. He lifted a skin, felt behind the hearth, pressed against the wall where shadows lay thickest. Nothing gave way. No hollows, no drafts, nothing that answered him. Just stone, soot, and worn traces of a life lived here long. Roland went methodically among his sleeping victims, heavy and determined. Where the sword was too unwieldy, he used strength, a sharp grip, a yank, a dull impact against stone. Penny followed him. She moved low, controlled, like she didn't want to disturb the air more than necessary. The knife came out quietly. She ended her targets without hesitation, throats exposed when bodies lay wrong in sleep. It was quick, efficient, without drama.